I am Daniel Fiverson, and I am an evolutionary astrologer trained in the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. I have been a student of metaphysics, specifically astrology, I Ching, and tarot since the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the 1960s. So thank you all so much for coming today, and especially you, Linda, for making all of this possible. As I speak, here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Uranus is in a partile opposition with Pallas Athena, squaring the lunar nodes. The significance of this event will reveal itself in a little while. But is this not a truly Kairos moment to be talking about astrology? Well, I don't know. Sorry. Does anybody know what this word means?
No.
It's mishugas. It's Yiddish. It means madness. When we observe the world the world around us that is emerging, some of it can only be explained as madness, what only seems to be insanity. And I think we're all here for the same question, and we're asking the question clearly in different languages as well. How is all this mishugas going to get worked out? Today, I would like to journey through some of the astrology, the history, the mythology, and some of the people and current events that reveal the challenges that we are all facing and the remedies for these turbulent times. You probably are already very familiar, you know this, that since 2007, we have experienced and will continue to experience the impact of the 7 epic first quarter squares between Uranus and Pluto. Over the next 2 years, this evolutionary and revolutionary potential will be handed off to Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto again as those 3 outer planets interweave. The Mayan calendar reveals a sequential acceleration of time, which explains the accelerating swiftness and intensity and density of these current times. We can truly say that we are blessed to live in interesting times. Excuse me. John Lennon said that it will all be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. In his farewell address, President Dwight Eisenhower Dwight Eisenhower said that the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. We must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, our resources, and livelihood are all involved, and so is the very structure of our society. Is that not a Capricorn word? We must stand guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. And this was over 60 years ago. It's echoed by Carl Jung, speaking in the same time period. He said, "A mood of universal destruction and renewal has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, and philosophically. We are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious human within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. So much is at stake, and so much depends on the psychological constitution of the modern human." So the core of my astrology practice is centered on Jeff Green's work, but I have come to embrace the perspectives of other teachers as well. And most recently, I have found that there is practical value in the new translations of Hellenistic manuscripts that have recently become available to us. Specifically, I'm talking about the concept of sect, S-E-C-T, night and day. Rather than frame the primary elements as male and female, I find that the concept of day and night provides a much richer and fresher point of view of the nature of these elemental polarities. For instance, during the day, there's only a single star in the sky, the sun. And at night, there is an immeasurable multitude of stars. During the solar day, we have singularity and coherence. During the lunar night, we have multiplicity. Significantly, there's also a twilight space between the day and night, and we call it dawn and dusk, whose story unfolds in shadow and silhouette. Master magician Psychopomp Mercury rules this liminal time space. As he shuttles back and forth between the upper, lower, and middle worlds, synthesizing the alternating diurnal nocturnal matrix of day and night, he synthesizes these core elements. So both of these polarities, dark and light, are materializing in the world around us, though not necessarily how we expect them to look. The dark does not look like light, and the light does not look like dark. That looks like dark. A light is showing up in a lunar wave of goddess energy, and it's seizing the initiative around the globe. At the same time, a dark solar wave of authoritarianism is depositing physical and spiritual toxins around the world in places like Brazil, Korea, Saudi Arabia, Syria, China, Russia, the Philippines, and Iran, and dare I include the United States. Authoritarianism. Is that not a Saturn-Pluto word? Recently, on his HBO show, Last Week Tonight, John Oliver, the British comic, started by running through the many leaders around the world who have risen while exhibiting problematic qualities. He said, while no two authoritarian leaders are the same, the global trend toward them is alarming because in many cases, people are actually choosing them. If you're under attack or if you've been made to feel that way, it's nice to have a charismatic individual say, fuck the rules, fuck the system, I've got this. Then they try to dismantle institutions so they can weaken any check on them. In Brazil, whose new president, Jair Bolsonaro, endorses torture, threatens to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and suggests that his country was better off under military rule. In the Philippines, where President Rodrigo Duterte has overseen the extrajudicial killing of thousands of alleged drug dealers and threatened to impose martial law nationwide. In Hungary, where Prime Minister Viktor Orban has quashed the free press, enriched his cronies, and stoked fear and hatred of refugees. In Poland, whose Law and Justice Party has undermined the independence of the Supreme Court. Even in Italy, whose leaders demonize immigrants, bash the European Union, and pal around with Steve Bannon. And this all comes from the Atlantic Monthly. So, out of respect and fear, Saturn is called the Lord of Karma. We know that he is the law of cause and effect, the Hermetic principle of what we reap what we sow. It's Saturn's prime directive. He is the creator and guardian of time and space, and as such correlates directly with what we call reality, as defined by the majority consensus. Jeff Green describes Saturn to be the structure of our consciousness. Why? Because Saturn, if not by aspect, by phasal relationship, connects to, reflects upon every other planet in our charts. And it overlays its structure on the way we think, the way we act, the way we dream. Everything about us is conditioned by the placement of our Saturn by house sign and aspect. He's man-made law. Those laws, customs, and norms that we are all expected to accept and follow in order for the group to maintain stability. He's involution, and in Kabbalah, he's Binah, the Shekinah, the great mother, the vessel that receives spirit. He's gravity and mass, the force that draws spirit into matter. And he's crystallized form and structure. He's contradiction and limitation, and psychologically, this becomes inhibition. And he measures the time from naivete to maturity, because as we age, we gain skills and we develop mastery. As the ruler of the midheaven, he correlates to where we are striving in life, what we strive to achieve, and where we can best fit into society. He's the outer expression of our fourth house self-image, our ego, how we project ourselves out into the world, and what is our place and our status in society. And he's the father, but he's also the sins of the father. And those of you who are familiar with the mythology know that Uranus ate some of his children that he had bore with Gaia, and Gaia was so enraged that she encouraged Saturn, Kronos, to castrate Uranus. Saturn, when he became the head of Olympus, also heard a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, so he ate all of his children. Only Zeus survived because Rhea fed Saturn a stone instead of Saturn, or instead of Zeus, and he was able to grow and actually fulfill that self-fulfilled prophecy. Karma is passed through family constellations, generation to generation. This is Jeffrey, and his work is dense, so it's a little bit dense to get through this, but I thought it was important to include it. The entire EA paradigm of natal Pluto, the location of the south node of the moon, the location of its own planetary ruler by house, sign, and aspects to other planets, Pluto's polarity point, the location of the north node of the moon by its own house and sign, and the location of its planetary ruler by its own house and sign and aspects to it correlates to the primary evolutionary karmic axis, the bottom line for the soul's ongoing evolution from time to time. It's like a foundation upon which a house is built. Relative to that foundation, the rest of the entire chart is then properly understood relative to that context. Everything else is referred to that context, the primary evolutionary karmic axis. This is paraphrased from the Jeffrey Wolfgreen School of Evolutionary Astrology message board. So Pluto, its planetary ruler, house and sign correlate to the root structure with any chart. The soul and the soul's lessons in this lifetime is what Pluto it brings forth. It's the information that it holds. And it's the nature of the soul's deepest need for security. The soul is a security-oriented entity. And security obviously is different for everybody. For some of us, it's to be like everybody else. For others, it's to be different. And for others, it's for us to find our way back to the source of all that is. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio, and it's the evolutionary engine. It's the unfolding of the karmic lesson plan. It's lessons learned through direct emotional experience. You know, something happens to somebody else, somebody at work loses their job, or next door neighbor becomes ill, somebody's in an accident. Yes, we feel it, it hurts. But until we feel it emotionally in ourselves, we haven't learned the lesson. So we have to have a direct emotional experience of whatever it is we're passing through in order for it to enable us to really engage with it and move forward. It creates a metamorphosis. It's the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. It's transformation or cataclysm. There are 4 different ways that we can approach Pluto. When we're young, generally we get the cataclysm. When we're older, we say to ourselves, this looks familiar, and we become more proactive with it. But this is Saturn's role as well. This is where we begin to recognize that these are recurring patterns and it's time to make a different choice. And it basically, it's what came before. It's what we have brought with us into this lifetime. So Capricorn is the zodiacal sign that's ruled by Saturn. It's consensus reality, that which is generally agreed to be reality, again, based on a consensus view. And it's how we fit into society. Capricorn is the opposite of Cancer, so we're talking about Saturn and Moon. We're talking about our emotional body, and the way that we are contracting, and it works, not contracting in that emotional body. So it becomes panic and fear. It becomes repression and suppression, and it becomes depression. Though depression, is not a bad thing necessarily, and I'm not talking about clinical depression, but the moon moves through its own cycles of animation and withdrawal, and we all move through cycles of animation and withdrawal. Capricorns move through deeper cycles of animation and withdrawal, I could say. But we all move through those same cycles, and it is clearly it causes a state of reflection necessary for the unfolding of our consciousness. Again, it's how we reflect, and it's how we kind of take a step back and understand what's happening to us. It's our personal ambitions. It's what we're striving for in life, and it's the need to establish personal authority. How we establish our sense of personal authority, Leo, in the context of society, Capricorn. And it's cardinal Earth. We have to remember that this is a cardinal point in the chart. This is the beginning of a new cycle. It's a major shift. It's a turning point. It's at the culmination of the chart, of the natural zodiac. And there's a need to establish something real and tangible, an achievement. So we're also witnessing what's been characterized as a blue wave. It sounds like Neptune, right? Neptune, the deep depository from which our visions, our dreams, and our hopes emerge, and where we've buried all our fears. Neptune has been transiting his own emotionally fluid realm of Pisces since 2011, and he's going to remain there through 2025. Is it surprising that our zeitgeist is saturated with both utopian and apocalyptic visions? We are witnessing a rising crescendo of activism led by women who are seizing the streets, the Congress here in the United States, the headlines, and the state and local governments. Standing Rock brought together Native Americans, and they were joined by many others who were unified in the reclamation of their native sovereignty. It's over 150 years since the end of the Civil War here in the United States, and African Americans are still having to defend themselves from vicious racial attack. And Hispanics, who are part of the cultural foundation of the United States, especially here in the Southwest, are being turned away at the border as aliens. It's quite a conundrum. Perhaps the most disturbing to me of all of it is that students are needing to demand safe gun-free schools. So, women are leading the way. We all came into the world through our mothers. Did we think that they had forgotten us? So there must be another actor in this story, a goddess. It can't just be all men. Now, it's been suggested that a man should not be here talking about goddesses. We all, to some degree, are androgynous beings holding forth both day, night, and twilight energy. Men have goddess asteroids too. I want to introduce Pallas Athena. Why Pallas Athena? Well, mythology tells us for the most part that Demeter disguised herself among mortals. Vesta only engaged with those who Hermes brought directly to her door. And Hera was too wound up in heroic and immortal dreams, immortal dramas, to bother with mortals. In the Greek poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer describes how Pallas Athena repeatedly informed the fated Greek and Trojan heroes how to meet their destinies. She patiently and faithfully guided weary and wandering Odysseus safely home. I have had the blessings of goddesses in my life as well, and thankfully I have had the accidental wisdom to have learned from them. So who was Pallas? She was the daughter of Zeus, born parthenogenically from his head, from his crown chakra. She was known as the unwearying, virgin, she who fights in front of the city. She was the goddess, as I said, most engaged with mortals. She's the goddess of wisdom. She was a strategist. Uh, Pallas sees the whole picture, sees the entire paradigm, and then is able to take each of the little pieces within it and figure out how they work in the larger whole. That's her strategy. She's a patroness and a protectress. She was the patron goddess of the city of Athens, which was the largest city-state in Athens in Greece. She's a woman in a man's world. She opens the chart for women to find an equal place in patriarchal society. And she informs us, she's a messenger. And interestingly, astrologically, she's the octave transformer between Mercury, the lower mind, and Uranus, the higher mind. So why Pallas now? Why have I included Pallas as part of this talk? And why do I think she's so significant at this point in time? Well, she was conjunct the lunar south node and Neptune in Pisces at the time of the Women's March here in the United States, or actually all over the world, in 2017. She was conjunct the lunar north node during the July 2018 eclipse season last summer. She will square the lunar nodes from January through August of this year. And as I said, she's partile opposing Uranus today. They're not exactly square the nodes, but there's a partile opposition today to Uranus, forming a grand cross. And at the total lunar eclipse last month, she formed that cardinal grand cross as she squared the lunar nodes and opposed Uranus and Eris. So actually, that grand cross and this opposition today will, in one form or another, play out over the next 6 months until the next eclipse season. Perhaps most significantly, she will conjoin the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium in September of 2020, and we're going to look at that chart in a little while. So, excuse me. So, the story begins on November 6, 2018, when the lunar nodes ingressed zodiacal Cancer and Capricorn, and where they will reside until May 5th of 2020. And this sets the stage upon which Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto will play out their play in 3 acts. The first act will be Saturn conjunct Pluto. Act 2 will be Jupiter conjunct Pluto, and Act 3 will be Jupiter conjunct Saturn. And actually, at that Jupiter conjunct Saturn will be the major stellium of all 3. The scene opens. Actually, can't get this a little out of order. The scene opens under a balsamic moon at Scorpio. The moon is the ruler for lunar south node, pulling us down into our own underworld through personal emotional journeys. There are deep underlying issues that are unresolved, activating as inner and outer phenomenon. One cycle is closing, even as the heartbeat of the new embryonic circle can be heard. Oops. Sorry. So we also have a square from Saturn to Chiron. Opposite Pallas, and this is initializing the work. We're being informed and mentored and healed, but the process is challenging. Venus in this chart is partile conjunct Ceres in Libra. So there's an intensity of what feels out of balance, and it generates an essential sense of loss. And it's only exacerbated by the opposition to Uranus retrograde at 0 Taurus and Eris retrograde in Aries. So there's a need for individuality. The need for individuality is paramount. And the survival of what we deem to be most important is at stake. Essential authority, essential authenticity has been denied or disallowed. And this is revealed by the opposition squaring the lunar nodes, forming a cardinal grand cross. We've had a long-standing trine from Saturn to Uranus, and this will become a square from 2020 to 2022. It's going to create stresses, pressures, and opportunities regarding our authenticity and our individuality and the ability to ground our inspiration into something that's actually a working process and a working practice. Now, Chiron is retrograde in Pisces, opposing Pallas Athena also at 0 degrees, this time in Libra. We're in a total activation to release the wounds of inequality that have been suffered and buried in the subconscious for so long. And Chiron forms a water trine with Jupiter in Scorpio and the lunar south node in Cancer. Opportunities for the emotional courage to speak out, to speak to the source of our wounds, and to find the remedy. So quite a base note here for really the next year and a half. And again, what happens, what transpires over this period that we're currently in, will extend, as certainly as the nodes move into Gemini and Sagittarius, carrying forward into our ideas and our beliefs. So also at the ingress, these are the goddesses actually, and these are the aspects to Pallas herself. And as you can see, she is reaching out to every other goddess point in the chart. There's authenticity and commitment and the need to speak to truth. There's no compromise or surrender to core values, Black Moon Lilith. And there's a zero tolerance for compromise with consensus, Uranus. A necessity to speak the truth, no compromise, zero tolerance, commitment to what is essential. So these are the two eclipses. I didn't take the time to do these again. Actually, I did them in the last talk we did here. But as a result of these two eclipses in January, we have had the longest U.S. government shutdown in history, with the threat of it returning in less than 2 weeks. 8 individuals associated with Donald Trump have been indicted so far. And there was even a report that the FBI investigated Donald Trump for collusion with the Russians. The British Parliament voted down Brexit. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who we're going to meet in a little while, hits the ground running. And we had the Mouvement des Gilets Jaunes in France, a populist movement that really rocked France. So all of this is a good indication of what we're looking at, the populism that will be emerging, as well as certainly with Jupiter and Sag, a lot of truthing happening here. So the next event, the opening act of this major 2020 event, is in on January 12th of 2020. This is the chart. It's already in orb. I use a 5-degree orb for transits. So it's really in orb from actually today through July. Saturn will turn retrograde again, and then come back. November to May of next year with the perfection in January, and it will remain in orb through November of 2020, with the perfection being on January 12th. We have 6 planets and the lunar south node in Capricorn, including a Sun, Mercury, Saturn, Pluto, Ceres, stellium, all within 2 degrees of each other. Authority will be powerfully spoken from many quarters, many opinions, many versions of the truth, and many versions of reality. There's a need to speak out about what has been lost, wounded, or disempowered. Occurring during the last decade of Capricorn, this is a powerhouse combination of well-developed Capricorn energy. This is Austin Coppock in his 36 Faces. He says, not the struggle to build, but to administer the world. The dynamic seen in this face is the struggle for control between an individual and their world. Eris in Aries forms a partile square to the stellium. We can expect more disruptive, unsettling, and challenging confrontations to the status quo. So, we've got Saturn and Pluto conjoining certainly, but relatively often, every 30, 40 years. But I went back and I looked just at the conjunctions in Capricorn, and it was very telling. So the first one I came to was 187 BC, and this was at the end of the Greek classical age and their control over the Mediterranean. Sparta, which had been the most powerful of the city-states, had relinquished to the League of City-States led by Athens, became the dominant power in Greece. But at the same time, Rome had risen in power and actually had forced the Greeks to surrender all their possessions. So Rome became the master of the Eastern Mediterranean, a transfer of power from Sparta to the Greek states and from Greece to Rome. In 47 AD, we had Christianity, which led to the Jewish diaspora from the Holy Land. So here we had, again, a transfer of power, a whole reconsolidation of where power was in the world from one religion to another. 500, 600 years later, we had the birth of Muhammad and Clovis uniting all the Frankish rulers under all the Frankish tribes under one ruler for the next 2 centuries, and Justinian. So clearly, Muhammad, we have seen, in our world today, one of the things that we are most struggling with is the conflicts between Western and Eastern religions, Islam. Clovis, probably very few Americans, probably more Europeans are familiar with Clovis, but he was one of the early French kings, and he literally was able to unite all these different tribes for the first time in 200 years. And Justinian totally changed the Catholic Church. It was actually Justinian who really brought forth the whole concept that it was the Jews who had murdered Jesus, which was the seminal moment of anti-Semitism in the world. All began in 549. 783, we have Charlemagne, and he united Europe for the first time since the Roman Empire. So again, we're seeing, consolidation of power. 1294, the papal seat moves from Italy to France. Edward I orders all of the Jews out of England. Marco Polo returns from Venice, where his travels in China. So again, the world's map is changing, and the sense of again, there's a huge power shift that occurs in those years. 1519, Magellan circles the Earth. Cortez and the Spanish conquistadors come to the New World, North and South America. This was huge, led to a mass genocide of the native peoples of America. Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses, so here we have the shift within the Catholic world itself into Protestantism from Catholicism. And the Mughal Empire in India, the beginning of an empire that would last another 300 years. This was something very interesting that I came across. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there were extreme weather conditions due to what they believe were large volcanic eruptions. There was a tremendous rise in global temperatures. There was famine. There were crop failures. There were epidemics. All of this caused by change in weather. And I thought it was significant that, especially with the weather that we're seeing around the world at the moment, and all the climate change, global warming, history doesn't rhyme, but history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. So these are the significant dates. We've had these eclipses and the ingress already. In 2019 had the two January eclipses. We have two more coming up in July and then one in December. And then the January of 2020, 2 days before the conjunction on the 12th, April 4th with the Jupiter conjunct Pluto, Saturn, Pluto, and the North Node on April 30th. And then we have the eclipses of 2020. And then finally, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of December, just before Christmas of 2020. These are the dates as they unfold. And this is why I have included Pallas Athena. So you can see the dates that I've already elucidated are squares and conjunctions and to the nodes. But if you look at these pink and yellow stripes here, you'll see that she will conjoin Jupiter 3 times. She'll conjoin Pluto 3 times, and then Saturn just once, because she will begin her journey here at the node. And actually, at the time of the through 2020, she's going to retrograde and pass back and forth over all of these outer planets 3 times. Saturn only once. So what we're seeing is that as Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto come together, Pallas is going to weave herself through them, back and forth, interweaving with their energies. So this is the stellium in December of 2020. And you can see that Pallas is only 4 degrees from Saturn and Jupiter at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Pallas is at 4 degrees. Pluto is still in Capricorn. And we have a grand cross here as well, still with Uranus and Vesta now instead of Neptune and Vesta instead of Uranus and Pallas squaring the nodes as we come through 2020. That'll be a topic, I guess, for another talk. So at the stellium, we have a new phase conjunction with Pluto and Capricorn. Pallas Athena conjoins Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, and this occurs in the 10th house for the chart cast for Washington, D.C. The 10th house, according to SkyScript, tells us that this is the monarch or president, the government, people in authority, royalty, eminent and famous persons, national trade, national reputation, credit and power, public employment rate. Not much here that's not already headline news. Neptune, remember the reference to the blue wave? Exactly opposes Vesta, awakening the Virgo-Pisces axis across the 5th and 11th houses in the chart for the United States. So here's the need to synthesize vision and personal authenticity and how to ground and manifest our dreams. This powerful self-actualizing dynamic, This powerful self-actualizing dynamic squares the lunar nodes in Gemini and Sag, realizing an essential karmic imperative. There's a karmic imperative here that will not compromise with anything less than absolute ultimate truth. Jupiter is relative truth. Neptune is absolute truth. Truth with a capital T. So this is how it looks in real life. This is Pallas boots on the ground. This is the chart for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For those of you who are not already familiar with her, she's an American politician and educator. She's the U.S. representative for New York's 14th Congressional District, elected on November 6, 2018, after she won the Democratic primary, defeating the incumbent Democratic chairman in her district. It was called the biggest upset in the 2018 midterm election. This is a cardinal chart anchored by, there's three cardinal grand crosses here. Her 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 moon is exactly conjunct Pallas Athena, and they square the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, stellium, and Jupiter series. The moon and Pallas tightly oppose Neptune. The sun squares. Sorry, get the right thing here. The sun squares Neptune and Jupiter and opposes Eris, and Mars squares Jupiter and squares Saturn, Neptune, opposing Eris. So remember the blue wave. Neptune conjoins Saturn, Uranus, and Vesta in her first house. Neptune squares her sun and moon, squares Mars in the ninth house, squares Pallas Athena in the third house, and makes an exact challenging aspects to her lunar nodes, semi-squaring the lunar north node and sesqui-squaring the lunar south node. She's committed, uncompromising, independent. She's not afraid to initiate a crisis in order to accomplish what she needs, what is her vision. She's a conscious Capricorn. She embodies a natural blend of authority, individuality, vision, and authenticity. And what's significant here is that goddess energy anchors the angles. She has Vesta in her first house, Pallas on her IC, Ceres in her seventh house, and Juno and Lilith in her 10th house. What really came up as interesting is that she has an asteroid named after her. Asteroid Ocasio-Cortez, which was in 5 degrees of Leo when she was born. She won a high school science fair, and the award for winning that science fair was to have an asteroid named after her. So even in high school, her star was rising. So, and it's not just AOC. I've picked a couple of who I consider to be a couple of the goddesses of the blue wave, and here's 5 of them. So most of us are familiar with RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Sharice Davids was the first Native American elected to Congress. Deb Haaland, who's actually here in New Mexico, was also a Native American elected to Congress. And Amy Goodman is a well-known American investigative journalist. And you can see how their Pallas and Vesta and Ceres, how their goddess energy overlaps and interacts with the chart of the United States. I'm using the Gemini rising chart here. There are a number of charts in circulation. I happen to feel that this one is the most accurate, with Uranus rising in the first house, the moon in Aquarius. I truly believe that is the American spirit. But at any rate, regardless of the house system, the ascendant that's chosen for this chart, the planets are all going to be in the same place, and all of these conjunctions are going to be active. This is what's happening, and this is how they are affecting the future trajectory of where this country is headed. It's remarkable to see it. You see it, but when you look at it, you understand. Say, of course, it's there. It makes a lot of sense. So, what some others have said about this conjunction with Pluto and Capricorn, the very nature of structural reality will be metamorphosed through varying degrees of cataclysms. Those cataclysms will occur as a consequence of choices that have already been made and will continue to be made in our collective future. The essence of these choices comes down to the fact that the natural law of giving, sharing, and inclusion has been perversely altered. Actually, I'm reading a different slide, aren't I? Okay, hold on. Let me read you this one. So this first one is Maurice. The meeting of forces represents, among other things, the redistribution of power in the world. So Maurice is saying what I said. In other words, which faction will make the decisions that affect the greater collective, whether this occurs in plain sight or behind the scenes. And Maurice wrote this actually back in 2015 for Mountain Astrologer. Richard Nolly, who is a pretty outspoken fellow on Facebook, describes this. He says, Jupiter and Saturn were the outermost known planets in ancient times and were called the great connoquators by astrologers of old. For millennia, the alignment of these two planets has been regarded as a significator of great social, economic, and political watersheds, historical turning points, if you will. And lastly, we have a quote here from Bill Herbst, who writes fairly often also for Mountain Astrologer. He says, the Saturn-Pluto cycle is about the use of coercive force by authoritative, sometimes the approval of the authority, sometimes with the approval of the public. It connects to the authoritarian, repressive, and often violent impulses in human nature. The cycle is characterized not by hope or optimism, but as rather a defensive response to fearful expectations, a kind of striking out in self-protection against perceived threats, both real and imagined. The emphasis is on definite black and white responses to our shared fears about reality. There's no gray zone here, no relativity and no subtlety. Instead, absolutes tend to predominate. On the positive side, accentuated Saturn-Pluto periods indicate courage or perseverance during extreme hardship or against seemingly insurmountable odds, as well as moral and emotional staunchness, the strength to hold the line against negative or destructive forces. Power can be used for good or ill. During the Saturn-Pluto periods, both are likely. And so this is Bill Herbst. So this is Pallas pointing out Ithaca, showing Odysseus the way home. The goddesses are within us, or they're speaking to all of us. The downloads that are providing are transformational. Like Odysseus, we may feel lost at sea, but we can be guided safely home if we listen, and if we act on what we are hearing. The Hopis told us back in 2001 that we are the ones we've been waiting for. I'm pretty sure that they are right. John Lennon told us, again, it's all going to be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. I will be starting a new class in the spring. These are the details of it. There's more information on my website. I invite you all to join me or tell your friends about it, whatever. It's going to be a great course, 12 sessions. And this is my contact information. This is how you can find me. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I have Pallas conjunct my midheaven. Thank you. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions. If anybody has them, comments, questions, anything that they would like to add, subtract, or contribute. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi Daniel. I wondered what you thought about specifically Uranus in Taurus. You know, there's obviously financial implications, but what else did you think about that?
Well, I don't, I've actually, kind of been watching Uranus for the past, few years. And, Uranus in Aries was kind of a remarkable event. I thought that, certainly it's what brought us some of the leaders we have around the world. That people became very much self-important and became very much about themselves. They really were radically, what's the word? A radical selfishness, if you would, seemed to be pervading the world. So now that Uranus is shifting into Taurus, I almost feel like there's a hunkering down in that self-empowerment, that radical selfishness, if you would, where people are going to become even more fixed in who they are, and the polarities are going to become even more entrenched, perhaps.
Yeah. Hang on to what they've got, sort of thing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. For dear life.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, also the indigenous people. I mean, I would have thought an uprising of the natural world and a real you know, revolt about that it's gone too far. Obviously, that's already come about, but a real surge of a fight to protect.
Yes, yes. Well, Taurus, you know, we can look at Taurus as an embodiment of who we are. So yes, you know, I think nature is going to become important. I think things that are indigenous are going to become important to us. So I think we're going to see even more of that as the nodes move into Gemini and Sag. But mostly, I think that we're going to see a narrowing, if you would, rather than, you know, an expansion. I think we're going to see people perhaps being more focused on what's really essential to them. And again, that's a wide spectrum of, you know, for one, it's going to be money. For another, it's going to be, you know, their liberty, their individuality. So, you know, we're going to be pulled in two extremes. But you know, it's going to be about what's essential and what's important. And it's also going to be a very personal embodiment of it, for sure.
Back to basics, which isn't a bad thing, really.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. It's a good question. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
To hear more about Pallas Athena conjunct the midheaven.
Oh, Pallas conjunct the midheaven. Well, this is something I am, you know, just beginning to understand myself. I have it in my own chart. I mean, clearly, I think it's going to bring activism into our social sphere, and we're already seeing that. We're certainly going to see, you know, not just women in the streets, but joined by men and women in the streets, at the polls, hopefully. I think we're going to see people more active. I think we're going to see people trying to negotiate this, perhaps, and trying to find the common ground, but ready to, you know, really stand their ground if they don't, and to fight for what's really important. Because, you know, in Taurus, things do come into Uranus and Taurus is going to bring things down to the short strokes to some degree, where, you know, there's zero tolerance for compromise. You know, if you don't have food or water or clean air, you can't compromise on that. There's you know, we're talking about things that are essential to our survival. So I think we're going to see people out there speaking their truth and allowing, you know, if we look at Pallas as the intermediary between the higher mind and the lower mind, if you would, then we're going to be allowing those inspirations to become vocalized. We're going to have to allow. We can't subvert them anymore. We can't dismiss them and say, well, you know, maybe that's not true. We can't have the doubts and the limitations. We're going to have to get out there and do it. You know, this is. It's almost like a bucket list, you know, moment for all of us, where things are coming down to a critical point where if we don't make some really important changes, there'll be nothing left to change at all. That kind of makes sense. Yes.
Daniel, you have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here. I don't see my chat. Where's my chat? Boy, I don't have a chat link here. I'm sorry.
I'll read it out for you because I'm thinking she may not be able to unmute.
Thank you.
The question is, I have Pallas conjunct my Sun and Mercury and Venus and a stellium in Capricorn. Would this be considered the blue wave signature to lead Pallas is at 23 degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. I think intuitively, you know what it means. I can't really tell you what that whole thing means without seeing everything that's going on in your chart and knowing how each of those planets is working. But certainly with Pallas interwoven with all those, major planetary points in your chart, yeah, I would say that you are definitely gifted with that vision. Yes.
So you wouldn't consider it a cataclysmic signature to have Pallas at 23 degrees and then Mercury Sun in the 10th, the same as America's signature in Aries. I've often wondered, because it's similar to the United States chart, if that's a cataclysm or if that is to stand and lead at all costs. It seems like I don't know.
I don't understand why it would be why do you feel it would be a cataclysm? I don't mean to question you, but I don't see that as a cataclysm. For conjunctions are difficult because it's a blending, and it's hard to say what the pressures are on both of those two planets beside each other. But with them in your 10th house, I think that is somebody who's being asked to step up to the plate. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. It's just that it's so close to the United States chart. I said, oh my God, it's a little scary for me because I know they have a lot in the 10th house in this way.
I know, but I really believe that in the long run, the United States' destiny is not what we're experiencing, in 2019.
I understand. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was wondering, as far as I can't remember exactly where the conjunction is supposed to take place. Is it supposed to be near the nodes of Saturn? And
yes,
Pluto?
both Saturn and Pluto are on Pluto's south node, and I think it's also Saturn's. I can bring up the chart if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Sure. All right, give me a second here.
That just seems like it's gonna just kind of juice it, juice everything up, for lack of a better word.
There's no question that things are going to continue to accelerate. It would be a mistake to assume that all of a sudden everything's going to, we're going to have all this ramping up, all this activity, and that things are just going to quiet down, right? I mean, this is leading us somewhere, and certainly with hang on one second. I've got using two monitors here, and they're not. It's not cooperating at all. There we go. So which conjunction did you want to look at? The Saturn Pluto?
Yes. I was just wondering how close was it to to being to the nodes of its own node. Oh, actually, Saturn and Pluto. Now, if you're sharing that, we're still seeing the last screen that you had up.
Yeah, no, I'm actually in Silver Form. I'm just trying to
okay.
Find it here. Okay, no, I don't have the nodes in this chart, so let me get a different wheel here.
I think it's uni wheel. You and I.
Was I not in a uniwheel? Yeah, it was. I don't see the extras. Here they are. There we go. This is the one I like. Do I have the notes? You know, I have, this is fixed stars. Hold on. Okay. So, they're not here. Wait a minute. All right. There we go. So yeah, south node of Saturn is at 23 degrees. And south node of Pluto is at 22 degrees. Can you see that?
Yes, yes. Wow.
Could you make it a little larger, expand the picture?
Let's see.
I'm having trouble seeing it. And I'm learning about the nodes right now, so this is a very good question. Oops. Thank you.
Yeah, it's filling my screen. It's as big as I can go. Can you see it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, try and move it over here, but I don't think that's going to make a difference. Yeah, it's got to be here. No, didn't want to do that. I hate Windows. It's as big as I can make it. It's little. It's right up here. All right, so does anybody else have a question?
Yeah, Eris involved there too. Obviously, you know, she hangs around for a long time, but with that conjunction and the nodes squaring, it looks pretty volatile.
Well, I think we're already getting a pretty good taste of it already. You know, I don't think it maybe it's creeping up on us, but it's already here. You know, I think one of the most interesting things about astrology is when we begin to recognize that everything occurs by degree. You know, 1 degree at a time, and it moves so slowly it's almost imperceptible. But the analogy, you know, if we take a selfie or you look in your bathroom mirror, you know, on January 1st, and then you come back on July 1st and you take the same selfie or you look in the same mirror and not look anytime in between, you'll see changes. But if you were to look in that bathroom mirror every morning, you won't see a single change. So, you know, I think that this is kind of the way it's unfolding. It's almost imperceptible to us, but over time, the pressure is building to the degree that we know something's happening. I have a friend who used to talk about the analogy of frogs in a pot, and yeah, and you know, one turns to the other and said, "Do you smell something cooking?" You know, right? So
well, we can feel it though, can't we? We can feel it cooking. But
right, exactly. I mean, I smell the garlic.
Astrologers are more sensitive. So.
Yes, so it's kind
get
of
out of that pot.
Exactly, it's kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yes, all the ingredients are there already, aren't they? Yeah.
But yeah, I think that one of the key pieces of all this, you know, in our country, in the United States, is the Pluto return. And this is a big unknown because nobody has, been around, as the last time that happened. We only know what happened. But if we go back and look at some of the aspects and the points at which Pluto was transiting through 1773, 74, 75, 76, and you see the things that happened in those years. We're in those years, okay? This is like 1775 for us. The war had not broken out yet. We were still a colony. But yet, the Stamp Act and the Boston Tea Party, all these things were going on. Nobody in those days knew where it would lead, right? So, it's like, and again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yeah, well, like Brexit as well. I mean, it's like the parent country, the mother country, and so there is a lineage there with, there's
right.
Like the family is, at beginning to be under siege.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all the old ways have to change. I mean, the last vestiges of colonialism and imperialism, because they're still there, really. I mean, they're just disguised.
Exactly. They've been denied and swept under the rug, and all these issues are emerging. And to me, this is the beauty of the time that we're passing through. People want to make jokes about Donald Trump. They want to laugh at him, or I have a whole different perspective on it. First of all, I don't want to get into the politics here because it's not really important. But he is a catalyst. He is bringing all this toxic stuff to the surface, right?
Cat among the pigeons.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
And he has also coalesced all of these people who supported him, who, in my opinion, are going to wake up, one of these mornings and realize that they've been taken to the cleaners, right? And so my partner Susan says to me all the time, I get it, we need him, but why do we have to live through this? Well, it's not about us. It's not about us.
Yeah, right.
It's about those who haven't gotten it on their own. So we all have to have the experiences we need. We have to have the direct emotional experience in order to process, internally, to embody these changes, because without that direct emotional experience, we do not embody the change.
Sure. And the gradual process, as you say, is necessary, because otherwise it'd be too much of a shock to the system.
Hey, if Pluto only made one pass, it would kill us.
Yeah. I feel the heat's been turned on gradually. I felt that.
Right. We need 3 passes. If we had the 3 passes, we just wouldn't be able to take it.
No, exactly. We're being gradually bored.
Right. But it's all
it's
good.
An important time, isn't it? It's a very momentous and important time in history. So
no question. And we
we
chose to be here. We chose to be here. Even more,
Yeah, we can take it. We chose it.
Right.
Or we just gluttons for punishment.
Even more confusing is that we made the choice to be here. So.
Yeah, very good.
So Daniel.
Yes.
I have a comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
It strikes me like he's the Pied Piper, gathering the flock. And the way I see it, you're talking about Trump, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like gathering the forces, or gathering the proponents of the past who are creating conflict with the evolutionary intentions. So this conflict is necessary. It's like an oppositional energy. So if we look at the opposition to Capricorn, we've got Cancer, which is the self-image, and these people will fight to maintain the security of the past, right? But it's a necessary fight. Yes. And that North Node in Cancer is ruled by the moon in Leo, which is leadership. And so is this chart the exact first conjunction?
Yes.
Right, that's very interesting.
Yeah. There's only one conjunction. Oh, yes.
Only one.
There's only one Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Yes.
No, I'm talking about Saturn.
Oh, Saturn. Yeah, I'm sorry, Saturn, Pluto.
There's
Yes.
no retrogrades or anything that take place. And
Yes.
okay, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So what do you think of my observation?
I think it's spot on. And you know, Cancer, we're not just talking about, you know, Trump's, you know, life, or um, Macron, or May. We're talking about generations. We're talking about families that go back, you know, through generations,
Yes.
hundreds of years of, you know, power and wealth and land, and they're not going to give it up easily.
Exactly, the halls of power.
Right, right,
Exactly.
right.
And also Capricorn, it struck me what Michaela was saying, that Capricorn is actually a very plodding energy. It's very careful, takes one step carefully at a time as it goes up that mountain. So it is a gradual thing, isn't it? It's not like a Uranian energy.
Right, exactly. Yes, no question.
But then Uranus is there working in the background very positively because it's trining Capricorn by sign.
but we have to remember that the stellium, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of December of 2020 is going to be in Aquarius, and the nodes will be in Gemini and Sagittarius. So we're going to see a major shift by the end of next year.
Well, that's very exciting, and I hope you'll present a Zoom meeting on that one.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
If we're all here to talk about it, yes.
I've made my comments, so please, anybody else, please do go ahead.
I was just going to say what you said just now, there's a lunar eclipse, of course, in Cancer, 2 days before the conjunction, so the 10th of January, you know, yes. 21 degrees, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that really highlights it, a lunar eclipse in Cancer. Wow. Gonna fly.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So you say big changes, and so many astrologers have so many lenses and perspectives that they see all of this. What does it represent to you? Changes, how do you see the changes? Some people go cataclysmic. Some people say it's all government change. Some people take the spiritual aspect of it, you know, ascension, you know, souls ascending the new earth. What is your whole perspective of this change? How could you put it in a sentence?
Well,
you could just put it in a sentence. What is your point?
I have to preface this, and, you know, don't take this as, you know, avoiding your question, but I have to say that I personally don't hold astrology to be really well served as a prophetic science, and I say that because all of the future is a probable future. The future is going to be, our individual futures are going to be what we individually choose. In other words, you know, the choices that we make in this moment, it's going to determine what happens tomorrow, next month, next year. And I think it's the same for us as a collective. What's happening is that the collective center is slowly moving. You know, they said that the North Pole is moving. I think that the whole polar polarity of the Earth itself, the consensus polarity, is also shifting, you know, by degrees very slowly. And as that consensus shifts, then what is considered to be, you know, right or wrong, or what we are intending, our collective or mass consciousness and our collective intention for the future is also going to change. And that's the space that we're moving through. And I think that that's what, I think that is the advantage that we have, if you would. It's the positive aspect of it is that it is in flux, and because it's in flux, you know, when something's in motion, it's easier to change its direction. It's when it's totally stuck in one place that it's much, much harder to move and redirect. So there is movement. And while there is movement, you know, it's almost as if we all have our hands on this thing, and, you know, whoever's pulling hardest seems to be the direction it's going, and it's moving back and forth. But I believe that we are moving towards the principles, the ideals and principles, and the spiritual intentions and visions that we have held, at least for the last 40 years, you know, since the 60s, when the Uranus-Pluto conjunction began, which I see really is the seed moment for the time that we're in. And, but yet we've got a lot of history and a lot of old behavior that needs to change. And it's not going to happen, you know, overnight. It's going to take some pretty amazing events to see anything, you know. I just don't think that you know, somebody's going to wave a magic wand and, you know, go poof. I think we're going to see it by degrees, but I think we are moving towards the ideals that we all hold in terms of, you know, the highest good for all of us. I think it will come to that. But it's not until everybody has had that direct experience of what it means to not have it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
It may have to go downhill a little bit before it begins to go uphill.
Thank you for answering. I thought you did answer the question, so thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. Hard to answer.
So many perspectives out there.
There are, and that's what we're dealing with. And I think that these perspectives are only going to increase, not decrease, because people are going, as they wake up, are going to recognize that they have a voice, and we're going to start to hear some of these voices, which is good. And eventually, it will be you know, a chorus that will harmonize. But we have a ways to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel, I think a huge issue is race, because Capricorn correlates to race. And this is something we all have entrenched deeply within our unconscious, that we identify with the race, with our races.
Mm-hmm.
And that has caused separation and conflict and wars all throughout history. So looking at this chart, Capricorn, Saturn represents race, whereas Uranus is trying to break through all of that. And Uranus is ruled by Venus in Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that is diversity. And Jupiter is diversity, you know, and that's where we're heading. And I see these attitudes being transformed. What do you think?
No, I agree. I agree 100%. People are going to recognize that we really, that you know, there's only one of us on the planet, and it doesn't matter what color or what gender or, you know, what culture we are. We are a single species, and at some point we're going to need to recognize it. Linda, what concerns me is I often wonder what kind of global event would be necessary for that to happen. You know? And again, I don't want to, you know, introduce any negative stuff, but, you know, I keep coming back to that, you know, that the learning is it requires some pain. It requires something to happen that really jolts us to realize that we have to change. You know, human nature doesn't want to change. We stay in a job, we stay in a relationship. We know it stopped working a long time ago, but the fear of what's out there is greater than the pain of what we have, and so we don't change. We need to experience, you know, something that makes the pain greater than the fear.
Well, Saturn is about the past.
Right.
And so we're looking at the past, we're looking at our past actions, and of course we're looking at the past 2 world wars.
Right.
Depressions, you know, we don't really need any more cataclysms, because I think the lessons are there and right in front of us, and we can make changes straight away.
I wish that would be true.
I don't think I'm looking for a cataclysm, you know.
Well, we've had them in this country. We've had one after another.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just looking at Uranus trining the Capricorn, looking at that very positively, you know, and I don't know, it's for each individual, really.
Yes. I think that it really comes down to two things. I think that each of us has to take responsibility for ourselves. I really think that's where it begins. We can't expect somebody to, there's no savior coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. We have to look at our own life, our own health, our own well-being, how it is, who we are. We have to come to terms with who we are. I think that's where it begins. And if everybody did that, the world would change, relatively quickly. But I think it is, that's Saturn, that's Capricorn, that's responsibility. And I think that the Cancer piece of it is recognizing that we are all family, to some degree, even people that we don't know. We have to recognize that there is a brotherhood of man. We are a single, species on this planet. Just like the bees and the ants and the flocks of birds, we have to learn to live with the same coherence. We don't have that. Somewhere, along the line, we lost it, and we need to find it again. But I do believe I think that's where we're headed. Or unfortunately, if we don't, then does everybody know who Greg Braden is? Yes, no? Greg Braden? Greg Braden lives here in New Mexico, and I've had the opportunity, to hear a number of his talks. I did a workshop with him, but he did a talk, and this goes back actually 7 or 8 years ago, and he talked about the 10 extinction events that were all active in the world at that time, and I think they're all still active. Whether it's climate or nuclear holocaust or all of these things, we have never lived through a time in history where so much could go so wrong so fast. And we have to pay attention to this. We can't just continue, business as usual and just go on the way that it's been, because it's a karmic imperative that we need to wake up and recognize, to smell the roses, smell the garlic that we, in the pot that's boiling that we're sitting in, and work with it. That's just my 2 cents.
Well said. Well said.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add or ask or say? These have been great questions. It's a great group here. Thank you.
Could you talk about the series involved in there? I keep looking at that sickle, and the thought comes to my mind is, are we going to have the wisdom to, root out the structures and wisdom and reflection to really look at the past structures and how they've only benefited, a few people? Or is it going to take that sickle to rip out the entire the entire foundation? And then, you get to the point where, like you said, you have to notice it then, because as long as it's not, and that's always been the problem, those that are in the majority, because it's not happening to them, it's not an issue.
Right.
Like Ronald Reagan said in the 80s, it's a recession, when your neighbor loses his job, but it's a depression when you lose yours.
Right.
Because it hits home.
That's exactly it. Exactly.
It hits right there,
Well, Ceres is about that personal loss. Ceres in the chart, one of the things it correlates to is where we have experienced our deepest personal loss. So, it holds it holds that kind of experience that we have to recognize, whether it's our freedom or you know, something is going away that, again, you know, Uranus and Taurus, something that is essential, something that we cannot sustain our lives emotionally, physical, mentally, or spiritually without it. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know what our timeline is, but I had a quick question. Would you say that all of the goddesses, I do a lot of meditation and I'm working directly with the energy. I consider them alive like beings, you know,
Mm-hmm.
That's just me. I kind of feel they're sisters.
Oh, they are. Oh, they are. They're sisters and mothers and daughters. Yes.
Okay, so would you say that they are harmonizing, that where they fall on the chart and where they fall in the United States chart, they're actually coming here on a mission, so to speak? Because when I heard you speaking earlier, I was like, it felt like, oh, the sisters have come, the women have come. They're on a mission to balance out the patriarch.
Absolutely. But I think it's much bigger than that. I think we can trace it back to the 1970s when the asteroids were first discovered and an ephemeris was created for them. Actually, the asteroids were discovered at the end of the last century, but we didn't have an ephemeris till the 1970s. And it was in the 70s that we had the women's movement was birthed. It's when it was really began. You know, and you know all the names, you know all the women who led it. And so we're riding that, but it has never been as important as it is now. It was an emerging voice back in the 70s and 80s and, you know, through the 90s, you know, through the last 40 years or so. But it was coming from a base which was what's the word, very self-contained, if you would. There wasn't a lot of outreach to men, perhaps, or to women who were, you know, feeling very comfortable in their lives. It was certain women who really started it, and it has grown by degrees because the world around us has disintegrated by degrees over the same period of time. So this return of the matriarchy, which is really what we're seeing, you know, what we're seeing with Pluto on its nodes, is we're seeing this patriarchal shift, and we're seeing the point at which the whole thing turns. You know, where this is the pivot right here, and what we're experiencing now is it's really surfacing. It's really coming up, and it's mainstream. It's not just, you know, these radical women, you know, Susan Sontag, and, you know, it's not just them anymore. It's everybody, because it's what they're fighting for is not just for women. It's for men and Native Americans and African Americans and you know, people trying to cross the border into the country and people leaving the Middle East and coming into Europe. It's happening all over the world. This is this lunar energy of you know, multiplicity. This is the multivalence that is emerging in the world, rather than this patriarchal singularity and this coherence to the status quo that really has been the rule of law for, you know, 5,000-6,000 years. It's changing, but it's been changing for at least 40 or 50 years. It's just that now it's really becoming mainstream. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question.
I just wanted to say that I really am enjoying the conversation here, and I just really appreciate what evolutionary astrology can add to our lived experience in the world. So thanks for bringing the conversation here for us today.
Thank you being part of it, because it's not just one person doing this. We all have to do it. It is a dialogue. Has to be a dialogue.